Hello, I think I'm connected. Almost ready to start. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. So I think I'd like to address in this talk and probably a few subsequent talks the way to approach studying the Dhamma. First, we'll make a distinction between what's called in Pali Patipada and Pariyatti, which is practice and study. Of the two, the practice is the most important. One can attain the goal without study, although it may be more circuitous route than if one had some theory. But one will never reach a nibbana by study alone. No, that's clear. In all the Buddhist countries, there's always been some emphasis on study as an important part of the whole path, learning the teachings. And in Buddhism, there is a vast literature. There's quite a lot of material to for studying. Now, in the Theravada Buddhism, we have as the core, we have the Pali Canon, which in itself is quite a large compendium of books. And then there's the Adhikata, the commentaries, and the Tika, the sub-commentaries. Then there are various additional works that have been produced even down to the present day. So what I propose to do in this session, I'll make some general remarks, and then I'd like to examine some of these branches of the literature in the subsequent sections. We're fortunate in the present time with the ease of access we have to the scriptures. All of the Sutta Pitaka has been published, translated into various languages, complete in English, I think in some other languages as well. And with the use of the internet, we can access many individual suttas. There's a very good site, accesstoinsight.org, that has quite an extensive collection that one can access. And if a person wants to go back to the original, the whole Pali Canon in Pali is available in digital form. So this is in comparison to ancient times when we have stories of, for example, Chinese monks making long, hazardous journeys through the mountains to get to India to acquire the scriptures. We have an incredible wealth available to us with unheard of ease. And the danger, of course, is that now we take it for granted. I'd like to say something now about translation. Mostly we'll probably be looking at the suttas in translation into English or another language. We should be somewhat aware of the limitations and difficulties of a translated text. There's no such thing as a perfect translation. It is, in fact, impossible because no two languages are fully isomorphic. Isomorphic is a mathematical term meaning that one set can map onto another set. Like the alphabet, the capital letters and the lowercase letters, they're two isomorphic sets. They have a one-to-one correspondence. But say the Roman alphabet and the Greek alphabet are not isomorphic. They don't perfectly map into each other. And no two languages are fully isomorphic. So any translation is going to be an approximation. And translations can be done with more or less skill. And the translator has to make decisions. There's an overriding decision the translator has to make, which is more important, readability or accuracy. Very often, if you translate with an emphasis on trying to be as one-to-one as possible with the original text, the result becomes incomprehensible in its unreadability in English. An example of this that I can recall, I don't know if anyone else has seen these, is some of the early translations of Ajahn Mahabua's talks that were done back in the 60s and 70s. The translator, I understand, felt such respect for Ajahn Mahabua that he was very afraid to tamper with his words. So he translated from the Thai pretty much word for word, which made quite a mess in English, because Thai language is grammatically very distant from English, and it doesn't really work to do a word for word translation. This is a problem that's especially acute. It's a translation problem that's especially acute when we're translating from a non-Indo-European language like Thai or Chinese. It's somewhat mitigated when we're translating from Pali, because Pali is an Indo-European language, and some of the deep grammar is at least within some association to English grammar, because English is also a non-European language, an Indo-European language. So, that's one problem. Another problem is that very many words in Pali do not have a single perfect English equivalent. This is just something we have to deal with. So what I recommend is that if you don't have the time or the inclination to go the full way to studying, learning to read Pali directly, you should at least make an effort to acquire a vocabulary of the most important technical terms, so that you can catch some more of the nuances of the text, and know when you read a word in English, have an idea what the original word is. A very good source for this is Nyanaponik's Buddhist Dictionary. It's available, readily available in printed edition from BPS, and it's also you can find it online as a PDF. This is a relatively short book. It's not a complete Pali English dictionary, but it just has a good listing of all the kind of technical terms of mental states and so on that occur in Pali. This is something that Pali has a technical vocabulary that's quite precise. A lot of English words are vague, and are used by different people in different senses. So a word like consciousness, what do people mean by consciousness? It's the English word means different things to different people, whereas the Pali words like chitta and vijnana can be defined quite precisely. They were intended for that. So we have to have some caution with using in reading translation. But even going back to the original language is not without its pitfalls, because we are dealing with a vast gulf of time and culture between modern Western society and ancient India, and it can be a bit of a hurdle to try and put yourself into the mind set of the Buddha's intended audience to understand what is being said properly. We should always be on guard that we're not imposing modernist interpretations and conceptions onto the text where they're not present. Buddhism is not a scriptural religion in the same way say Christianity or Islam is. Although Buddhism has its scriptures, they're not approached in the same spirit. They're not seen as divine revelation, and Buddhists are not expected to be fundamentalists about in reading the scripture. There is a concept of Buddha Vachana, meaning the speech of the Buddha, because the Buddha was perfectly enlightened. His speech is always going to be true and to the point. But the problem we face, even if we hold to that idea, that the problem we face is how do we know that what we read in the texts we have passed down to us are genuine Buddha Vachana? This becomes an academic textual analysis problem. The texts that we have made a long journey through different countries, different means of propagation, until they come to us in a bound book in Romanized Pali, Pali set in Roman characters, which is a fairly new innovation. It only dates to the 19th century. Fortunately, we have some idea about the veracity of the texts. And some scholars, in particular, Bhikkhu Bodhi and Anelio Bhikkhu, have done considerable work in comparing the Pali texts to what are called the Agamas. These are Chinese language versions of early Buddhist texts that can be compared to the Pali. And the theory is that where these texts agree with each other, with the Pali with the Chinese Agama, then we can be quite confident that the text dates no later than the Second Council, because this is when the two traditions went their separate ways. The Second Council is traditionally considered to have occurred about 100 years after the Parinibbana of the Buddha. So this takes us quite far back. And the result of these investigations, it seems to verify that the vast bulk of the Sutta Pitaka can be relied upon to date to that period. If you're interested in looking at these details a bit more, if you get Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation of the Anguttara Nikaya, which is one of his more recent translations, the footnotes contain many references to comparing the text to the Agamas. You can get a good sense of how accurate the transmission has been. The suttas were originally spoken by the Buddha in most cases, in some cases by his disciples like Sariputta, and they were passed on orally for many generations. And when people hear this, they think that means that they're unreliable. But the method of transmission was actually very secure, in that it was done by chanting by groups. It's one of the reasons the Sutta Pitaka is divided into Nikayas. The word Nikaya means a group or even a college. And there would be monks who specialized in one Nikaya. So there would be Digha monks and Majjhima monks, etc. And they would get together in large groups every day in a large monastery, maybe a few dozen, and they would chant together one section. So if you have 40, 50 people chanting the text together, it's very hard for a mistake to creep in. It's self-correcting that way. So the texts were probably transmitted quite accurately for those while it was in the oral phase. They were first written down in Sri Lanka, probably in the first or maybe as early as the 2nd century BC, because the country was going through, which was the heartland of Theravada at the time, was going through a very difficult period of wars and uprisings and so on, and the Sangha life was very disrupted, and some of the elders thought that there was a danger of the Sangha being wiped out and the teachings being lost, and the best way to preserve them would be to write them down. So they did one of these over the course of many months. They did one of these group chantings, and scribes wrote everything down. Now, after the suttas were committed to writing, it became then over the next period, it became the most important means transmitting the suttas, and it had some more convenience in that way. You could have a text and keep it and study it. But it was, I would say, it was during the period of handwritten manuscripts that there was most likely any corruption or additions or deletions to the text would occur. It's very easy for a scribe copying a text to make a mistake, or even deliberately omit something he didn't like, or add a little gloss, which doesn't happen in chanting in groups. Now, we still have some good means of comparison here for the written period. When the Pali Text Society in the 19th century produced definitive editions of Pali for Western scholars, they compared three what are called recensions, that is, three versions of the text, one from Sri Lanka, one from Burma, one from Thailand, and all written in the different scripts of the language of the country. And they footnote in the Roman version, which is what many of you will probably have seen, that Romanized Pali. They're using the Roman alphabet is the one we use in English. If you see a printed edition of the PTS Romanized Pali, there are copious footnotes where they note every incidence where the three recensions differ, and they're actually quite close. The most common differences between them is, for example, in the spelling of proper names. Only occasionally is there a difference that might have some bearing on the meaning of the text. So I think that the bottom line of this is that we can be reasonably secure that the suttas as we have them are pretty faithful. Maybe not 100%, but a very close representation of what was actually said by the Buddha. Certainly all the major teachings, like Four Noble Truths, Dependent Origination, Seven Enlightenment Factors, and so on, occur so many times and are accurate across all these versions and recensions, that we can be quite certain that those are original teachings. Next week I'm going to start having a bit more of a closer look at the Sutta Pitaka and the divisions of the Sutta Pitaka. I've already recommended in this talk that you have a look at Nyanaponik's Buddhist Dictionary. There's another little booklet that's quite invaluable, published by the Buddhist Publication Society, and I'm not sure if this is available online. It probably is. It's called the An Analysis of the Pali Canon by Russell Webb. It has a lot of useful features to it, even though it's such a small book. It's quite a lot packed into it. There's an index where, if you know the name of a sutta, but I'm trying to find it, you can look in the index and it'll tell you where it can be found in the canon with the appropriate numbers. So perhaps I'll recommend one more book. But sometimes people ask me if they want to start studying the canon, where to begin, and I recommend they pick up Bhikkhu Bodhi's in the Buddha's Words, which is a one-volume anthology or collection of extracts from the suttas arranged topically. So there'll be a section on morality, a section on meditation, a section on emptiness, and so on, together with Bhikkhu Bodhi's very excellent comments on linking them together. So it's a very good place to start if you have not studied the suttas before, and then after reading that book, you can go in any direction it takes your interest. So I'll stop there and go to the chat, and we'll see what's going on here. Just give me a second to get it readable. Okay. First question is regarding translation. Do you think brokenness is a good translation for dukkha? Like I said, there's no one English word that's perfect in all contexts for dukkha. It's notoriously difficult to translate. Brokenness is not bad in many contexts. Imperfection is another one that I kind of like. Unsatisfactoriness. There's several that catch some aspects of the meaning. Bhante, why a lot of Western monks other than Bhikkhu Bodhi don't like studying Abhidhamma, saying it's not the word of the Buddha? It is clearly conditioned phenomena, and the Buddha said to Akali, if you want to see the Buddha, you should see the Dhamma. His Abhidhamma is still Dhamma. Second, what are the conditions for the arising of Trihetuka Vipaka Citta? Okay, why people don't like the Abhidhamma? I am going to do some in this series, probably in a couple of weeks. I'll be talking about Abhidhamma. Some monks don't like it because they don't think it's actually the word of the Buddha. And I'll get into that. There's actually a good historical argument to make that it's a later development. But to my mind, that doesn't negate that it's a valuable study. The Buddha's second question: what are the conditions for the arising of the Trihetuka Vipaka Citta? That is a term from Abhidhamma referring to resulting citta with three roots. Three roots are either the three wholesome roots or the three unwholesome roots. The condition would be a very strong karma, a karma that has some significant volition behind it. Ajahn, can you clarify that the first noble truth means everything, all conditioned things except nibbana is dukkha? Some monks say the Buddha never said everything is dukkha. I think that what's intended there is all conditioned things, and everything except nibbana has the characteristic of dukkha. Where it becomes problematic is again an issue of translation. If we translate dukkha as suffering, as is commonly done, then I think the statement is not correct. Not everything is suffering. There are pleasurable moments and there are neutral moments. But everything is dukkha in the sense of imperfection, of brokenness, of not being able to satisfy the mind. Every conditioned phenomena has this characteristic of dukkha. In your personal opinion, how much scripture was actually taught by the Buddha and how much was added or modified by later monks and politicians? Well, I think as I try to express in this talk, that we can trace the suttas with great confidence back to the the second council, 100 years after the Buddha. Of course, that's a period of time that would allow some modification. I don't think necessarily they're all, word for word exactly what the Buddha said, because there was obviously an editing process to make the text suitable for recollection and memory. So everything was kind of standardized and put into a literary form. And there may have been whole sections that were added later. One example of this is in a very many people's favorite sutta for its poignancy, its beauty, is the Mahaparinirvana Sutta in Digha Nikaya, the Sutta of the Buddha's last days. It's quite a lengthy sutta, and there's a lot of material in it that doesn't fit well with the theme of the sutta, the main story in the sutta, that was probably added in here and there. Like for no reason at all, there's a paragraph on the 8 causes of earthquakes. It's sort of odd bit that was somebody added it in. There's another secondary work that I found very interesting. Is it's called Mission Accomplished, and I can't remember exactly the name of the monk who wrote it. It starts with it's kind of an unusual name. It starts with a G. It's Jnana something. And he analyzes the Digha Nikaya Mahaparinirvana Sutta, and he compares it to some other versions from other Buddhist schools. And his idea was this was such a favorite sutta that it was, by later editors and redactors, they like to put in little bits of extra stuff in there. And I think that you can find throughout the canon, you can find sometimes a stanza here and there that doesn't seem to fit. It's kind of, not that it's wrong, but it's just out of context. It doesn't flow. Prerequisites you think are necessary if one wants to learn Pali from Warder? In which case, do you think it's better to start with something easier? Yeah, I don't really recommend starting with Warder. It's an excellent book, but it's very difficult, and he seems to assume you've got a good knowledge of linguistic terms and grammar theory. It's probably a more useful book to pick up later, after you've got some fundamentals down. There are several books out now that are good introductions. One I like is called A Pali Primer. It has great graduated exercises. It's much more approachable for a beginner. Okay, I'm sorry, I lost my place here. There's a lot of questions today. How to respond to a coworker that constantly spews out Christian verses when knowing I'm a Buddhist? I wouldn't get into arguments with him. There's no value in getting into disputes. You can just let it go. Do you think it is plausible Nagarjuna's version of origin of Mahayana texts were hidden with the Nagas for later revelation? I'm not convinced. And this is the kind of story that's made to give credence to texts that were produced later. There's a theory that I was talking about oral versus written. There's a theory that Mahayana teachings only became possible after literacy became widespread in India, because you have the transmission by chanting in groups. No one could come in and into the group and start introducing, Prajna Paramita. But when you just have to have one written document that can be copied, you can come up with any new text. And so to give it a pedigree, to make it sound more official, they say, well, this is spoken by the Buddha but hidden by the Nagas until the present day. There's one thing I come across, an interesting version of this. One of the early Buddhist schools made the claim that their teacher was a monk at the time of the Buddha who went up into the Himalayas, and he's Arahant, went up into the Himalayas and went into jhana for 400 years. And then he came back down into India, and he found out that, talking to the monks of that day, that they'd gotten everything all mixed up and wrong, and he had the true teaching. So he started this new school. Are the commentaries available in English yet? Not in their entirety. There's a very excellent volume by Bhikkhu Bodhi on the Sutta Nipata and commentaries, and it's a big, thick volume. Like, the commentaries are huge. I'm going to talk about the commentaries more. And you can get individual sutta commentaries from BPS. There's a number of them have been produced. Probably 8 or 10. The Brahmajala Sutta, Satipatthana Sutta, a few others. But the commentaries as a whole have not been translated. That would be a huge project. Would you have preferred to live back in the day when monks had to travel perilously to acquire scriptures, as you described? Or do you prefer today's modern versions? I gotta admit, I'm happy just that I don't have to cross the Himalayas to get a copy of the Digha Nikaya. Why do you think the Dhamma was preserved and protected in Sri Lanka but completely lost in India, where Hinduism is more prevalent? In a way, it's kind of a historical accident that because of the being on an island, somewhat separated from the main currents of change in India. Some people say that Islam coming in wiped out Buddhism in India, but really they just finished it off. It was already moribund by the time that the Muslims arrived. There were some Hindu kings in India that were very dogmatic in suppressing Buddhism. And also, Hinduism developed and changed. It took a lot of ideas from Buddhism. The Hinduism of later times has very little connection really with the Hinduism. It's not even proper to call it Hinduism, the Brahmanism of the Buddhist time. Do you prefer reading text in physical form, digital, both? And do you use AI at all? What is your view of it, please? I prefer, in general, reading in physical text. I'm kind of old school. But I do like, if I'm going to look at the Pali, which I don't make any claim to be a great Pali scholar, but I do have some knowledge of Pali, and I'll occasionally go back to the Pali text. I like to use the digital tools that have built-in indexes and hyperlink to a dictionary and so on. Makes it much easier. Have I used AI at all? I've tried just an experiment to see if I put in a Pali text into ChatGPT, for example, and ask it to translate. And the translation comes out pretty decent, and I think it might be useful as if someone were translating texts. I wouldn't rely on the AI 100%, but as a first draft that might be useful to use it. Do one's returners always have to have the last life in human realm, or can it be in a Brahma or Deva or Arupa realm? They always have their last life in the Sukhavati, which is a realm at the same level, or a higher level, but in the same bhumi as the Brahmas. I read a sutta where Mahavira vomited blood. Was this added later, do you think? Yeah, possibly. I mean, there's several suttas where a character called Naganta Nataputta, who modern scholars identify with Mahavira, is shown in a very bad light, and it may be the kind of what would you call it? The bias of the redactors. I think a lot of modern scholarship leads to the idea that Mahavira actually was not contemporary with the Buddha. He lived before the Buddha, which would make, I think it does make some sense in general, that Jainism was known in India before Buddhism, because the austerities that the Buddha or the Bodhisattva practiced before he became enlightened, the extreme austerities, they're possibly derived from the Jains. Is it true in Sri Lanka monks prefer studying sutta than meditation? I don't think you can make a generalization like that. The individual monks lean more towards study or more towards practice. So I don't think you can say it as a whole cultural thing like that. So does dukkha mean we cannot have permanent happiness as opposed to suffering? Well, you have to distinguish, and this is one of the problems in translating dukkha. You have to distinguish between a subjective aspect and an objective aspect. The subjective aspect is our feeling, and suffering is obvious, but there's also pleasure. But pleasure is also subjectively dukkha in that it's never perfect. It can never fully satisfy the mind. But the deeper meaning of dukkha is objective, meaning that the objects themselves, the dhammas, the sankharas that arise in the conditioned realm, are always going to be imperfect, incomplete, broken, provisional. That it's inherent in the object. It's not something that our mind imposes on the object. Well, what do we know about why the Atthakavagga reads so differently from the rest of the Pali Canon? That's Vagga is a section of the Sutta Nipata, and the whole Sutta Nipata has a different kind of style than the other Nikayas. Some scholars think that the Sutta Nipata is actually one of the least edited or most original, like the oldest in the sense, the most authentic text, because it does use it clearly uses some archaic language. For example, where the god Saka is mentioned, it's always mentioned under his Vedic name of Inda in the Sutta Nipata, and that's almost never used elsewhere. So it may have had a different. It's part of and the Sutta Nipata is part of the Khuddaka Nikaya. And we'll get into that, I think, next week about the different Nikayas. But the Khuddaka Nikaya is sort of a grab bag of different texts, unrelated texts, and that may be some Sutta may have been some very early divergent tradition. Which suttas from the EBT do you think have been added in? How much is Mahayana and Pure Land and Vajrayana and newer schools and Dhammas? Newer schools and traditions altered and modified Dhamma. Well, they've other Mahayana is major doctrinal shift. I'm not sure what you mean by EBT. Oh, someone's got the full name of that book I recommended, Historical Analysis of the Mahaparinibbana Sutta Digha Nikaya by Punnadhammo Gananarama. Yes, that's the book I'm referring to. That's the subtitle you given there, and it's called The Mission Accomplished. It's the title. The authenticity of early Buddhist texts by Sujato discusses in depth how much the early suttas are authentic. I want to let the added later. Yeah, that's actually a good source. Is there a commentary on the Anapanasati Sutta? Yeah, there definitely is. I'm not sure if it's been translated. I don't recall seeing it. Are there any Buddhist schools that strictly use verbal teachings and chants alike to the Buddhist time? Not that I know of. I don't think anybody does that anymore. Which Nikaya should I start with? I'm getting the 4 Nikayas tomorrow. Which Nikaya should I start with? Traditionally, you start with the Digha Nikaya, and then go to the Majjhima, and then the Anguttara, and the Samyutta last. That would be the traditional order, and I think it makes sense. Okay, so come to the end of those questions, and we're up to 45 minutes. So I think I'll leave it at that for this week, and next week I'd like to at least spend. I don't know if I can do it all in one session, but I'd like to look at the Sutta Pitaka, analyze that a bit. Okay.